All right. Hello, everybody.
Woohoo!
Hi. Welcome to our third episode of Social Justice from 6 Feet Apart. We're
So
so
much
happy,
distance.
so happy that you're here. So, we're going to introduce ourselves again in case you are tuning in for the first time. Dan, do you want to go first?
I would love to go first. Thanks, Kelsey. Hi, everyone. For those who may not know me, my name is Dan. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am coming at you from Tewksbury, Massachusetts.
And I am Kelsey. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm calling in from Middletown, Connecticut. And Dan and I both work in student services at Albertus. And we
Yes.
have been creating this web series to give folks one more way to connect with Albertus and with some of the conversations that we would probably be having all together if we were on campus. And we're so excited. So to get us into our third episode.
Best part.
That's my best one yet.
That was a really good one. It had like
Thank you.
reverberation right at the end.
It did.
Good job.
All right, so we're starting today's episode with our hot topics segment slash positive things going on in the world. Dan, do you want to kick us off?
I would love to. So mine is more of a hot topic than a positive thing. Kelsey has a positive story to share. But my hot topic is I saw yesterday that American Idol will continue its season with its first ever shows from home. So that led me to thinking, because I also saw like The View, which I'm an adamant watcher of. I love watching The View. The View has been doing their shows from home the last few weeks, and I know SNL this past weekend just did their show from home as well. So I
Featuring Tom
thought
Hanks,
exactly the love of
national
Kelsey's life.
treasure.
But I wanted to get your 2 cents, Kelsey, on what you think of people doing like recording TV shows from home. Because I have an opinion, but I want to hear yours
Oh,
first.
okay. Well, my opinion is that I have not watched any of these shows so far, so I don't know. But I think it's cool. I'll tell you what I have been watching are mostly on Instagram. Musicians that I really love have been recording. Sometimes they'll do like just a song or two. I watched essentially an entire concert of this band that I really love called Joseph. This is like very early on, like probably a month ago. It's 3 sisters, and they were all quarantined together, so they decided to like put on a concert and put it on Instagram, which I loved because that was, I don't know, it was like an hour and a half that I was completely entertained and felt like I was at a concert, even though I was sitting on my couch. So I have been watching some of that and very appreciative of those. People don't all know how to use the technology the right way, so like lots of mishaps often, but I think it kind of adds to the charm of it, just like on this show, right?
This show is very charming.
Yes. But what is your opinion of the TV shows being filmed from people's homes?
So mixed bag for me. It really depends. I feel like for The View, I appreciate that like they're doing it and that like they're still getting the information out there because a lot of it is on like COVID-19. But
Mm.
I also think just like part of the reason why I love watching The View is just like watching people debate their opinions around a table,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really not there because it's a virtual call. It's very similar to this. So I feel like it's kind of lost some of its like pizzazz and like entertainment value, quote unquote. But like
Mm-hmm.
they're still getting the information out there and they're still talking about like important things. So I feel like it's good. And for the most part, I also agree. Like I think it's great that people are recording stuff at home, still kind of putting content out there for people to absorb and create. Because I've seen a lot of TV shows like halting productions because of everything going
Mm-hmm.
on. So I think it's nice that people are still trying to like have some normalcy in the things that they watch and like the content they consume. American Idol though, I don't know how I'm gonna feel about that one. I don't watch American Idol, so I probably won't feel anything. But from the outside looking in, which is where I'm at right now, I don't know if I would watch it because I
Mm.
understand like on Instagram, I feel like it's been like a hotbed of like so much good like musician content, like different artists and musicians just like recording and posting stuff all the time. So I don't know if I would like watch it on TV from like people I don't really know. But I'm also
Yeah.
not the biggest American Idol fan anymore, so I don't know. It's different.
Yeah, I do think there's lots of opportunity for things to be really bad. Because obviously, so many of the people that are on American Idol, it's been a few years since I've watched it, but I did watch a handful of the first few seasons when I was like in, I don't know, middle school, high school. Obviously, most of the people on the show are very talented, but being a talented singer does not mean that you know how to like record yourself super well in your own home, or again, how to just use technology in a way that's going to like communicate it really effectively. And the production value of like the normal American Idol show where they're all like on the big stage and they have the good microphones and all of that, like I think is what part of what makes it a good show. So it does seem like there's going to be potentially some hilarious mishaps, or maybe just some kind of disappointing TV. I don't know.
I also feel like if they don't send everyone the same exact recording equipment,
Mm-hmm.
there'll be people with unfair advantages that aren't just based off of people's vocals.
There you go, Dan.
So,
Thinking about the equality of it all.
Hey, you know, this is a social justice webinar, so we gotta tie it back in somehow.
That's right.
This is it. But
American Idol, social justice. We're making it happen here.
Yeah, but I think it will be very interesting to see like what it actually like looks like, and if everyone has the same recording equipment, because I feel like that, because you know, like sometimes when people are recording, like their speakers blow, or like you hear like the fizzle when it gets like the big notes, or like they're too high or too like volume. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Music. So we'll see. I probably still won't watch, but we will see as a nation.
We will. We will. I'm sure we'll have students watching, so we'll get some feedback from our students. We want to hear what you think of American Idol filmed from people's homes.
Although The Masked Singer is what I hear is the most popular.
I know. Masked Singer is actually, man, what if they tried to do that from their own homes?
Oh, and you have to make your own costume?
Whatever mask you have in a box in your attic.
And you could like bedazzle it, and see, that would be cool. Like you have to do a DIY like at
maybe this is a new Alberta's program. Let's get the wheels turning. Okay, we'll come back to you with some more information.
Maybe
about maybe the Masked Singer Alberta's edition.
It's just me and Kelsey making masks for ourselves
and singing. It's great. Well, Dan, I found a great positive story to share with everybody this week. So some researchers in France have created a bacterial enzyme that breaks down plastic. I believe some of this, we have some enzymes like this already, like in the world that people use in recycling and things like that. But the cool thing about this one is that the end product, basically once the enzyme has like, I don't know, chewed it up or dissolved it, or like whatever the enzyme does, the end product in this case is something that can be used to be like repurposed to make new plastic bottles, or new, like it's a good enough quality that it could be used. It's food grade plastic, essentially. So this is obviously very new, so it's not being really used yet, but people are very excited about the possibilities that, you know, we could be doing a better job recycling, and getting rid of lots of the plastic that is just hanging out, not biodegrading on our planet. So thank you, French scientists, for figuring this out for us.
I can only imagine too, just like the mounds of plastic that are all over the world, like how much difference an enzyme. Now, I'm not the biggest science person, so I'm not exactly sure what an enzyme is. It sounds very scientific, but I'm sure. Wow, that wasn't even a word. But we're gonna move on.
I'm here for it.
Thanks. But like, it would just be so great if we actually are able to make it so that we can create something that we created we can't destroy right now in a healthy way. So if we were able to create something else to kind of get rid of that, I can only like imagine what that would do for the environment and just like the wildlife. That makes me excited because especially with all the stories about like nature like kind of coming back to life and like kind of just healing a little bit during these times.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about like the juxtaposition of that, like once things kind of get back to normal, how that's going to kind of have an impact on our planet. So it
Mm-hmm.
makes me hopeful that even during all of this, people are still looking into ways to try and
Yeah.
make our planet a little cleaner and get rid of some of that plastic. I love it.
Me too. Thank you,
Awesome.
France.
Yes, France.
Woo! All right. So, Dan, do you want to? I'll hold up the sign. Do you want to bring us into our topic for this week? Get ready for my beautiful homemade
Absolutely.
sign.
So this week we are talking about LGBTQ plus representation in media.
Yeah.
Woohoo! So
So
this is
we've.
something. Ooh.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is something me and Kelsey were chatting about after last week's episode. We were kind of brainstorming some ideas for the future, what we'd want to do. And this was something Kelsey thought of. And as soon as she said it, we both kind of just started bouncing ideas off of each other based off of like what we have seen, what we would have wanted when we were younger, and things like that. So we thought we would kind of just like take this time today to kind of talk about different representation in media, what we have seen, what it means to us, kind of how far we've gotten, places we could still go, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of just have like a general topic about the idea.
And there's so many different types of representation that's worth talking about in the media, even within the sort of general category of like LGBTQ plus media representation. We're going to talk about like not all of those acronym or not all of those letters in the acronym are represented equally. And then there's, we could talk about race representation in the media, class representation, ability representation. Like there's all these different topics. We picked the one that we feel the most comfortable and like qualified to talk about. But potentially for future episodes, maybe we can invite some folks in to talk about some of these other categories, because it's certainly all important, because the media shapes how we see the world in a lot of ways. So we wanted to start today just by sharing our first experiences of seeing another queer person on TV. Like, Dan, what do you think? Can you remember what was the first time you saw a gay person or a queer person on a TV show?
Yeah, I can. I remember for me too, I myself identify as a gay man. But I remember for me growing up, like I would have like these thoughts and just like kind of think about like, oh, maybe I like boys or whatever. And I'd be like, no, that's not okay. Like I need to marry like a woman, like I need to have a family, like XYZ. Like this was back when I was younger. And I kind of just internalized it because I didn't really ever see or know anyone who was gay. And the first time I ever saw any representation was when I was in fifth grade. I was in my basement watching TV, and a show Degrassi was on, and it used to be on all the time. And after this, I started watching it a lot. But it's about like it started in middle school and then moved to high school, and it kind of talks about like students and their experiences and what they do. And one of them was a student named Marco came out at during a play to his father on stage, and I just thought for me that was like super powerful because I have always like kind of toyed with those ideas, like maybe thinking I'm gay, maybe not even like knowing what that means. And that was the first time I ever saw anyone like on TV be like, I am gay, this is who I am. And from there, that's kind of when I first really started to think about and explore my identity. And I feel like just like seeing it was like that starting point for me because I didn't know like it was accepted or it was okay or it was like a lot more normal than I thought.
Wow, that's awesome. So you said you were in fifth grade when you
Yes.
saw that? That's
Yes.
cool. Yeah, and just an example of how powerful these kinds of storylines can be for young
Yeah.
people.
And I know like even for me, like I did not come out until like I was in high school. Like I didn't explore my identity enough to be like comfortable like saying what my identity was for a while. But I do remember that was like the first time I can remember thinking about it.
Yeah. I think I was trying to think about this earlier today, and I'm struggling to come up with what was one of the first like positive experiences I had of watching something on TV and seeing queer people represented. I guess specifically like seeing gay women represented. I think the first show that I probably saw that had gay women as characters was Friends. I watched a lot of Friends when I was in middle school, high school. And so there's like these sort of secondary characters that get married, and like that's, I mean, looking back on it, like that's cool that we got to see two women get married on TV. And it's not that the characters there was no problems with the characters themselves. Like I think they were portrayed as just like normal human women who happened to be lesbians. But their role on the show, I wouldn't say was super positive, because one of them, like Ross, one of the main characters, had been married to. So like her sort of coming out and realizing that she wanted to be with women was turned into them getting divorced. And like that was a big negative storyline like for Ross. So I don't know. I just feel like it was like a source of conflict on the show. And also the show Friends also just like, they make a lot of homophobic jokes on that show anyway. So like now, I don't know, rewatching it can be sort of painful sometimes, because it's like, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we thought this was kind of funny, but it's not actually funny. So that's my first probably memory. I think maybe a more positive example would be it probably would have been when I was in college. I watched Grey's Anatomy. And so then I think there's like a lot of good representation on Grey's Anatomy. Callie and Arizona's relationship, I think, is largely portrayed as pretty positive. And so maybe that is the first like positive example of representation that I saw. Yeah. But I think as like a kid, like it was just so off my radar that like I wasn't even looking for it really.
Yeah, and I think it's so important too to like recognize that everyone's first representation in media might not always be accurate or even positive as well. And like that must have been frustrating, kind of going back and thinking like, oh, maybe the first thing I saw was kind of negative in a way. So I totally hear you thinking how like that might not have been the best first like introduction, but at least we have something, even though that's not really, we shouldn't just be like, oh, we'll take anything. But it's nice that we have progressed away from that into actual representation, or better representation now.
Yeah, so we wanted to spend some time talking about that, sort of like where we're at now with representation. So maybe some other shows. I feel like Dan and I were going to talk a lot about like TV, maybe some movies as well. Obviously, media representation also includes books. We didn't really get into that in our planning for today, but for folks who have recommendations of great, I feel like there's tons of good, like specifically young adult novels now that have like great queer characters. We would love to hear recommendations.
Leave them in the comments.
Yeah, leave them in the comments.
We could maybe start reading those. That would be cool.
Definitely. We have plenty of time. So what's something, Dan, do you have other examples of shows that you like made you feel really seen, or you felt like had really good representation of the queer community?
Yes. And for anyone watching, spoiler warning potentially for any TV show we may be talking about, just in case, so that way like it's out there, we said it. I'll probably be talking about some spoilers and kind of how that impacted me with some characters, so just a warning. But by far my favorite TV show of all time is The 100. And I think part of the reason why I love that show so much is because of the representation that they do in the show. Like, not only do they have like great representation of just women being like really strong leaders and really like being like the heart of their people and kind of just like being so powerful, they also had some great representation with the LGBTQ plus population. I believe, if I recall correctly, The 100 was the first TV show to have their lead character be like confirmed bisexual.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really, really awesome, because that really didn't even come into play until like the second season. You didn't really know about that, because why would you? That wasn't the focus of anything for the first season. So for me, that was really cool to like have that as representation. But then a love interest for that main character named Lexa was for me like the first character that I really like felt a connection to.
Mm.
She was the like leader of her people. She was like a very fierce like warrior, like things like that. The show's kind of intense, so if you watch it, just warning. It's not like too bad. It's PG-13 or something, but there's like character deaths, things like that, pretty intensive. But you don't even know that she is a part of the gay community until like a few episodes after she's introduced, because
Mm.
they do such a good job like creating her as a character and showing how strong she is and that she's a leader of her people. And they build so many other aspects of her. And then at one point, it's kind of like, oh, now we're going to focus a little bit on this and then move away from it, because that was
Yeah.
never her like one defining characteristic or trait. And she had so much like love in her heart after like suffering from like a past love, and just like there was so much like mixed into it that like for me that was the first character that like I just was like, I love this character, I feel represented, I feel seen, and it was just like so cool.
That, you know what's like really remarkable to me about that is that it's I've never seen this show, but from your description of it, like you felt represented by a person who is a different gender than you in like a fantasy world, right? Like not in present day the United States, who is like a warrior. Like it's just really cool that something about her like you felt connected to, even though the facts of her life or of her story are so different from your own, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really cool.
I feel like it was just like having such a strong character, and she was so interesting and compelling, and then
Mm-hmm.
adding that layer on top of it without it feeling like, oh, we did this just as like fan service, or like to
Mm-hmm.
make it so that we like seem like we're LGBTQ plus friendly. I feel like for me, really, that was just like once that hook was in, I was like, favorite character of all time, like hands down, love her to death.
Oh, that's great.
How about you? Has there been any recent things that you've really connected with?
I'm really into just generally the network Freeform. So the first show that I watched on this network is called The Fosters, which has ended. They had a bunch of seasons, and it's about this family that has. I mean, the premise is that it's like, oh, normal. They live in California, just like a family, like nothing fantastic about it or anything, but a lot of things happen in their family. And it's two moms in the family, and they've got a bunch of kids, and there's just a ton of different characters that come through. Again, another show with like lots of good representation and addressing lots of different social justice issues and things really happening in our world right now that I think a lot of other TV shows are sort of afraid to address. But I really loved that show because it was just nice getting to see like two adult women with all their kids like living their lives, and just yeah, I don't know, it's like it's cool to, even though I'm also an adult, like these characters are older than me, and it's nice to say like, oh wow, like that's an example of like an adult life, like 10 years down the road from me or 20 years down the road from me or whatever. It's I think that's really nice. And then there's a spin-off of this show called Good Trouble that also has lots of queer characters on it, that I really love. And then another show on Freeform called The Bold Type. Similarly, like great representation, lots of interesting characters, like real human beings. Yeah, so it's hard for me to come up with a character that I saw and was like, oh my gosh, that's me, or that's yeah, like this is who I imagine myself to be, or who I would like to be, or something like that. But I think there's something to watching a show and just feeling really, it's kind of like a nice like cozy feeling of like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
this show sees me. Like the people that created the show are creating storylines that feel relevant to my life, even if the characters are really different from who I am.
exactly. And I feel like you brought up a really good point too. Like, there's not always like that one show that like it is almost an exact like replica of you, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really not like what representation is. It
Mm-hmm.
would be wonderful if it could be like that, but then we'd have
Right.
like 9 billion people on TV, so
Yeah.
not as realistic as we could potentially wish. But I think it's so interesting that they do have just characters on their like media, whether it be like TVs, movies, books, that people can really connect to, just
Mm-hmm.
in generally, like you said, kind of just like feeling seen and heard. But then also having like those characters that people are like I connect so like vividly to this character. Like I feel like I see myself in this character a little bit. I know for me, my brother showed me a TV show called Everything's Going to Be Okay. It like
Mm,
just came out. I think it's on
yeah.
like Freeform or something. It's supposed to be not even supposed to. I watched almost every episode. It's super super funny. Um, it's a little racy, and there's some like things that they talk about like drugs, alcohol, a little like contact for people, but like it's on TV, so it's like safe.
Hmm.
Um, but it was just the first time I personally saw like a white gay man kind of take that more maternal role of a family. And it
Mm,
was like after a parent passed away, he had to take care of like his two stepsisters or half sisters or something. Half sisters, not stepsisters. But it was just so interesting to kind of just like see that representation and be like, oh, I consider myself more of like a like feminine like male. I like could see myself like being like a really good father. So like I kind of think more on the maternal side and things like that. So
hmm.
for me, it was really cool to just like kind of see that representation of what I kind of see myself as, not fully like head to toe, that's me, but just like qualities of myself that I could see or relate to. I feel like
Yeah.
that too is just like really, really cool.
Oh, that's great. I will
Yeah.
put that show on my list. I've seen a bunch of commercials for it, and it looks great.
The commercials got me. They're
Yeah,
so funny.
awesome. So we have been kind of talking about some of the really like positive impacts of representation of queer people, some of the representations that we've seen or that do exist. I think we should talk a little bit about some of the critiques of how queer people are represented in TV shows, movies, the media in general. And there's a whole bunch of them that we could talk about. So one thing that I think is a little bit of a phenomenon, and I was thinking about this earlier this week because over the weekend I watched the movie Onward, the new Pixar movie that came out. It's people can watch it on Disney Plus. I do recommend this movie. I do think this movie was great. I thought it was funny. I cried a lot, which is pretty normal for me with like a Pixar movie, but I don't know. I think even more than whatever the last one was that I saw. Um, and there was all this buzz leading up to Onward being released that Disney, Pixar was sort of getting, well, praise from some people and then some criticism from other people because there's a character in in this movie who is openly queer, and the character is voiced by Lena Waithe. None of this is like really that much of a spoiler. I feel like all this stuff has been on the news already. And it is a pretty small part in the movie. She plays a police officer, and so some of the criticism was, well, okay, so Pixar people are like so excited that Pixar has their first openly gay character, and it's a police officer. And I think the reason why people felt sort of let down by that, some people in the queer community didn't like that she's a police officer, is because there are examples in history of times when like the police and the queer community have not had a good relationship, and that people within the queer community have been harmed by the police. So I think like that feels a little bit, it just feels like, couldn't we have given this character like any other job? And that being said, like there are gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual police officers in the world. So the character is playing a real kind of person. But I think the other thing that specifically like Disney and Pixar, I think that's interesting about how they sort of represent queer characters, and other shows do this too, is sometimes they'll have a character in in a movie that everyone's like, oh my god, that character is gay or is a lesbian or is queer or whatever. But the movie never really makes it explicit. But then we give them we give the Pixar or whatever company produced it, we give them like all kinds of credit, like, oh my god, look at this representation, when actually really they haven't done anything except have a character who maybe has like a certain kind of haircut or a certain way of speaking, or we like leads us to maybe easily assume their sexuality, but they don't have to do anything. The director, the writers, whoever didn't have to do anything like super controversial. So that's, yeah, I feel a little bit, it's a complicated issue. I feel
Yeah. Because
happy to see representation, but also wish that it was better, wish that it was more.
Exactly. Yeah, like that last like snippet, like happy to see representation, but wish it was more. Like that is entirely my feelings summed up. Like I agree. Like there absolutely are like lesbian cops out there in the world, and like they probably felt represented and seen, and that's wonderful. But on the other hand, I can understand why people could be frustrated or not really like that. And when you were also talking about the when like directors or just like people in television put in like little things like, ooh, like this person may be gay or like might be bisexual or a lesbian, it's just like frustrating to me personally because I always think like, oh, like you are not developing that character to be anything other than like a checkbox. And I think for me, one of those like moments was in the like Beauty and the Beast live action one
Totally.
that they just did. It was like this whole big thing, like, oh, like, you know, one of the characters is gay, one of them is gay. And there was like maybe a second and a half clip at the end. And it's just like, there's like no like clarification in that clip of anything. It's like, oh, it's kind of like you said, it's like kind of insinuated, but at the end of the day, it's like nothing monumental. It's really not making any strides, and it's just like I almost feel like it's there like check a box.
Yeah. Right. It doesn't feel like the intention, like it's like we wanted to do this to get a little bit of praise for doing it. Not because we wanted to have like a real representation of somebody in the queer community. Because I get that, you know, companies still, I'm sure, face backlash if they have a character in their movie, particularly like someplace like Pixar or DreamWorks or Disney, you know, like movies that are made for children, still get their movies get banned in certain countries, or certain states even in the US like won't show particular movies because of the insinuation that a character could be anything but straight. So I get that, you know, companies are taking a risk, like they could lose money, but I want them to do better.
You know what is so funny about what you just said too, Kelsey, is like that just kind of triggered a thought in my head when you were like, oh, like if people see gay people, like that might turn them gay. I cannot tell you how much content I have consumed with heterosexual couples.
Oh my God.
Just heterosexual people in general.
Yeah.
That's not what's going to do it, folks.
Didn't work?
Did not work. I can, for a fact, it did not work. It's just like that argument to me never makes any sense.
I know.
It's just, that's one of the ones that just baffles me kind of. And I'm just like, where does that come from? It's not going to do enough of a push to make you change like my sexuality.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's funny.
So silly.
Ugh. What else do we want to talk about? So there's a whole bunch of other issues around representation. Why don't we talk a little bit about who is represented by what's sort of your take on that, Dan? Like, who do you see being represented when we do have queer representation in TV shows and movies? Like, who are those people?
Yeah, usually from what I see, it is almost always like a white person, and after that, it's almost always like a white male, usually. And with that as well, I feel like the gay community has become, there's so many different stereotypes with it, but I think one of them is also just like certain body types for certain like groups of people in the LGBTQ plus community. So like I also feel like certain body types have more representation in media than others, especially in like the LGBTQ plus community. I feel like I have seen like a lot of just like white cis men that are like kind of skinnier, just like, and that is like the staple like gay. That is like a gay man.
Yeah.
So like I feel like for me personally, that's the most I see. And even like for me as a white gay man, like I wish I could see more because I think it's more interesting and compelling when you have a diverse cast of characters with like different backgrounds and stories, because that's what compels me into a story. But like usually just like white cis people. Usually men. Yeah.
I think I could be making an assumption about our audience here, but I felt like maybe to just clarify what the word cis means, because I mean, it's in our vocabulary. Probably lots of people know if you're watching this episode, but for anybody who doesn't know, so hopefully most of us are familiar with the word transgender or trans, right? So a person might identify as trans if they are a gender that is different than the sex that was assigned to them when they were born, right? So if they know themselves to be a particular gender and it is different than what might be written on their birth certificate. So cisgender is sort of other folks who do identify with whatever sex or gender is like written on their birth certificate, right? So they're born and somebody says, oh, this person is female, and that person grows up and is like, yep, that's me, that's who I am. They don't identify as a different gender. So just for anybody who might not know what that means, and a lot of times we just abbreviate. People don't often say like the whole phrase cisgender. They might say cis, or transgender, they might say trans. So that's what we mean when we're talking about that. And
good catch, Kelsey, because whenever, and that's also something I need to kind of check myself on too, is just whenever I talk about social justice, I always assume that the people I'm talking to always have the same level of knowledge as me. But I, for a fact, know that is not true, because if you ask me any of these things that we're talking about 4 years ago, when I was just starting college, like right over my head. So good catch. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance between like, our students at Albertus, you all are really smart and know more than Dan and I do about most things. But just in case, I think there's some words that like some communities, of course, we know what it means. And then there's other words that not everybody does because you don't talk about it every day.
Mm-hmm. And even like the word cisgendered, like that's kind of just like a description, like I am cisgendered. And that's just like another description or like another label to utilize. So
yeah.
Good clarification. So
what you were saying is that our representation of queer folks who are not white, queer folks of color, trans folks, women in some ways, particularly women of color, it's, we just don't have enough of it in media. Like, I think there have been some writers, directors, creators that are working to change this. I think the TV show Pose that came out, I don't know what season it's in now, like maybe it's second or third season, is awesome because it is just like full of particularly trans folks of color, make up pretty much the entire cast. That's great. That's a really big deal. And we're seeing some more inclusivity of different kinds of people. But yeah, I think for a long time, like the way that people creating TV shows and movies in the United States have sort of started to add queer representation has been to start with like gay men, like white, cis, gay men. And it's an interesting, I always think of Modern Family as sort of the example of this because the primary queer relationship on that show is these two white men who are also both pretty wealthy. I just sort of feel like all the houses on that show, they're all like big and whatever. I don't actually know what their jobs are, but they seem to have plenty of money. They adopt a baby from another country. Like that is just like a very, very specific type of person, type of relationship, like experience. And there's so many people in the queer community who could watch that and be like, that has nothing to do with my life, right? So it sort of goes back to what we were saying earlier, like we want people to do better. We want to see more. And the thing I also think about a show like Modern Family that is very, very popular and I know it just had its last episode, so I don't know, maybe like 10 years it's been on for a really long time. I also think it's really cool that for the last 10 years, this very popular television show that has two gay men as some of their main protagonists, like has been happening in people's living rooms. Like they've been watching the show. Yep. People who might not think that they know like an actual gay person in their life, even though they probably do, but maybe this is their exposure to the queer community. And like, that's also a good thing that people are seeing some example of a relationship.
Exactly. And I think, Kelsey, you brought up a really good point too, in that I know this because this was a trivia question in Cab's Kahoot game last night that they
Oh,
did
hey.
virtually. But Modern Family started in 2009, since it was on for like 11 years or something like
Yeah.
that. And when you think about kind of where we were
Hmm.
11 years ago, like before gay marriage was legalized, like
Right.
before there was as much representation on TV, I
Yep.
think that like what you said, like yes, that is a like we got like representation into so many people's homes, and I feel
Hmm.
like with that being an 11-year-old show,
Hmm.
maybe they did that because that's how they like knew how to do it or how they felt the most comfortable to. And I don't personally like who the writers on that show are, if they're part of the LGBTQ plus. Like I don't know how that whole process works over in Hollywood, but like I totally agree with you that like maybe it's kind of just getting that foot in the door first. And
Hmm.
this show is like an example of one that did that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what we're sort of uncovering here is this mix of like being happy and recognizing some growth that's happened in some industries and things like that, and then also just like really wanting more, right?
Yeah, like craving that next step, and
Yeah.
like that it's already coming kind of later than it should be. But
Hmm.
like I totally agree with you. I would love to see more shows that had better representation,
Hmm.
not only on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, but I feel like we said, kind of that's what today's webinar is on. We will be talking about other ones later, but I would just like love to see more shows that it's just like it's common to have like
Hmm.
multiple characters on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, and
Yeah.
that's not their defining trait. That's just a part of who they are as a whole.
Right.
I hope that we can get there soon because it would be so
Yeah.
cool to watch a TV show like that.
Me too. That's a really important thing to talk about too. Like when there's these characters on shows, sort of what is their story, right? Like whether they're a tiny character, a main character. Um, and has one thing that I sometimes feel frustrated by, again, I think there's lots of examples of people doing a better job than this. But I always feel frustrated when like we have a queer character on a show, and particularly if it's like a teenager or a young person, and their whole storyline is just about them being gay or being trans or being whatever they are, and like them maybe coming out to their family and seeing what their family's reaction is to it. Like, that is obviously a really important story to tell. And it's like a tiny, tiny fraction of an actual person's life, right? Um, and wouldn't it be cool to just see more character? I think about the show you were talking about, the 100 earlier. Like that wasn't the whole focus of that character's story because she was like a warrior. Like she had
Yeah,
all this other stuff going on, like real people. Like real people have so much more going on in their lives than just this is the kind of person I want to date, right? Um, so I think that's important when we can create storylines that involve LGBTQ people, but it's not just about them being LGBTQ.
exactly.
Yeah. What else, Dan? Anything else in this? We've talked about so much.
I know there's so many things. I feel like one thing too, I feel like we would be kind of like remiss not to talk about just because I remember it being such a big thing a few years ago, back around like 2017. I remember a bunch of articles popping up. It's called the bury your gays trope. And
Mm,
I know this one's a little more intensive. So not to go like, ooh, super exciting talking about TV, but then like kind of serious stuff. But I remember there were so many characters in the LGBTQ plus spectrum
mm-hmm,
who were becoming parts of TV shows, and they would have like kind of smaller character arcs, larger character arcs kind of be worked into the show, and then the writers wouldn't know what to do with them, and they would kind of just kill off the gay characters in the
mm-hmm.
show, and that's kind of where the barrier gaze trope came in. I have one article that I found from 2017 that says that there were 62 lesbian and bisexual female characters killed over the past 2 seasons of television, like
Whoa.
just of all TV shows. And then
Yeah.
it kind of goes in and it breaks down more of like the percentages of how much like representation in like TV characters is real based off of like America and just like the world population and stuff.
Mm-hmm,
But like that number kind of hit home to me because I feel like when I saw that, when I was doing research about this, it was kind of more like these gay characters were used as like markers or kind of just like pinpoints. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, we're going to use you for this specific part of the plot, and then we're going to take you out because we don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it felt like for me. I know
Yeah.
the 100 kind of had an issue with that, and there was this whole big thing around there. I won't go too into detail in case anyone doesn't want any spoilers, but I know a TV show I watched called Smash also dealt with
Mm.
the bury your gays issue. There, it was in a few different forms of media that I was consuming at the time,
Yeah.
and I never really thought about kind of how big of a deal that was, or kind of like how that could affect me in the long run. But I
Hmm.
remember when it happened on the 100, that was the first time like it really hit me. And when me and Kelsey were kind of talking about this whole idea of kind of LGBTQ plus representation in media, that was one of the first things I thought about was that bury your gays trope. And I hate it because like it is frustrating to see like once you get that representation, kind of having that taken away.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to kind of like talk about that, keep the writers like to their guns and be like, hey, like you did this. This is not what you should be doing in like the writers' room. Like if you're gonna be making these characters, don't just write them off as like a plot point
Hmm.
kind of thing. And I remember there were like movements around it. There were lots and lots of articles like posted about it. So I'm hoping that kind of helps stem the tide and kind of move away from that because I
Yeah.
personally don't remember seeing as much of that in the last few years. But I don't consume as much like general like TV media as much as I did. So I'm not too.
Yeah. I think the other issue with that is, I think certainly what you were saying, like, is this character just like a plot device? Like we just want them here so that we can tell this like tiny bit of a story, and then we don't know what to do with them anymore, so we're gonna kill them. The other issue is like, even if characters aren't literally like killed off of TV shows, I think the other thing that we regularly see with queer characters on TV shows is that they have really tragic storylines. Like maybe they don't die, but they have like every other horrible thing that could possibly happen to them. Um, and to me, it just says like, do we not think that queer people can also live joyful lives in? I mean, not all these shows are set in like present day America, but whatever time, whatever place they're set. Yeah, do we not as a society think that like, or even just boring lives, like you know my life is full of joy and is also boring sometimes. I would love to see a TV show that just shows me that, right? So I think I hope we're also starting to see that change. I think you're right that like the mainstream media got like a lot of criticism for that, and so I think some writers are taking that to heart and saying, okay, yeah, we want to depict people in a more realistic way, or not just always have people showing only the really sad parts of their lives. Obviously, we all have sad things happen in our lives, but there's joy too. And I think hopefully audiences want to watch that too. I don't
Let them be
know.
happy.
That's right. Let them be happy. Yeah. Ugh. Well, Dan, I so appreciate getting to talk about all of this with you. This has been just just a delight for me.
Thank you. Me too. I love reminiscing and kind of thinking about like old TV shows and like things that
Mm-hmm.
media I've consumed. Just like think about the representation I'm lucky enough to have now in the last few years comparatively to like when I was first growing up.
Yeah.
So like I can only imagine like what the next generation of like LGBTQ plus people are going to
Mm-hmm.
have as they're growing up, and that makes me really excited because I
Yeah.
think the next generation and the generation after that they will actually be able to see such like clear representation, and or at least I hope so. My fingers are crossed. I feel like we're moving that way.
Yeah.
So
I think so too. Cool. Well, our final segment for our episode is we share the music that is giving us life this week. Dan, do you know what your answer is to this question?
you see, Kelsey, that's a great question.
I
I
know mine, so I can go before you if you want.
You go first. Let me
Okay,
check my
great.
Spotify playlist and see what I listened to this week.
Yeah, I have a little bit of like a throwback. I have been listening to a lot of Fleetwood Mac this week, specifically their album Rumors, which is probably their most well-known album. It's got a handful of hits on it. I love Stevie Nicks. I just love her, and I love Fleetwood Mac, and if we've got folks listening that are not familiar with this band, this album, you should get into it because you'll hear songs that you've heard on the radio. But the whole album is great. Yeah. So that's my pick for this week.
Oh, I can't believe I forgot about one of the funnest things we do.
That's all right.
Ooh, okay. There is one that I found a while ago, and I added it to this playlist that I am like kind of just creating whenever I hear certain songs that make me think of certain things. I put them in certain playlists. It's a song called "Earth" by Sleeping at Last, and it's their album name is Atlas One. And I remember just like listening to it. It just like, for me, it's like music that really like makes me like feel things, whether it's like really happy emotions or like really sad, or just like when I can like feel the artist. And for this, it just like got me like in a really good mood as I was listening to it. So, "Earth" by Sleeping at Last, I would say, is
all right.
I have.
Great. Well, this is I think we've reached the end of our third episode here. Thank you folks for watching. We don't know what our topic for next week is, but we will have a good one, and we'll be back next Thursday at 3:00, and we'll record it so you can watch it afterwards too. We hope everybody is safe and healthy and having a good week. Had a great Easter, had a great Passover. We'll see you next week.
Have a good one, y'all.
All right.